morning, guests. Welcome to the Savour's podcast, the Sustainability Conversation. It's a pleasure having you as our podcast guest for the episode 2 of our podcast series. We have seen your astounding work as the chairman of Yes Full Circle, where you really play an important role in aiding companies to emerge as global sustainability champions. Before we officially begin the podcast, let me start by introducing the two podcast hosts. I'm Tanya, and I handle business development and operations at Savour.
I'm Simran, and I handle marketing and communications at Savour. Savour is a tech startup based in Singapore that started in August 2019. Savour aims to reduce food wastage and tackle food insecurity while empowering organizations with savings through digitalization via our one-stop B2B and B2C procurement and sponsorship web app platform at www.savourapp.com.
We connect individuals and organizations like nonprofits, companies, and school clubs who are interested to procure for their operations, programs, and events from merchants who offer expiring, blemished, and surplus but still perfectly edible food, as well as regular food, corporate gifts, office supply materials, and event rental services. Customers can place orders listed at bulk, charity, and corporate discounts and apply for in-kind sponsorships in Singapore. That's from 10% to 90% off and up to 10K worth of in-kind sponsorships.
Today is Savour's second podcast episode ever, and our theme for this podcast is sustainability. This is a 4-part podcast session with one session every week. As mentioned previously, we started this podcast series with the aim to get speakers who are experienced and knowledgeable in various areas and to get them to share their thoughts, experiences, and advice.
To add on, the key objectives of this podcast is to educate listeners, which we are targeting at the general public, merchants, and B2B customers who are interested to learn more about the various areas of sustainability in Singapore from industry experts' knowledge and experience in different sectors, and to inspire listeners on how they can play a part and also support the sustainability areas and the speakers.
So we want to learn more about sustainability in the context of circular economy. And for all our podcast listeners who are unaware of what circular economy is, it's an economic system that tackles global challenges such as climate change, biodiversity loss, waste, and pollution. So we wish to learn more about your experiences and perspectives as a stakeholder in the current sustainability scene at your company. Just an overview of circular economy, how to achieve it, and the various measures to encourage sustainable production, consumption, and waste and resource management.
Yes, for Circle in like Savour, okay. We are also a tech-based circular economy company. We leverage our decades of international waste management recycling experience to support organizations and companies and communities to become global sustainability champions. So we operate in multiple countries. Currently, I'm operating out of the UAE itself, and this is where we're talking from today. But in the content discussion, right, being a Singaporean, we will also be talking about experiences or applications that can work within Singapore itself.
Within the business processes, where can one, take the first step in implementing circularity?
Okay, so when you're looking at an organization, right, and any business, a number of steps involved, right? So what we always suggest to the clients is start at the end, okay, which means look at where, in our case, we tend to turn what the client say at the garbage bin itself, literally, okay? So from there, where we understand, right, what is going into the waste, and then we move backwards, okay, to understand, right, what items could have been diverted away from the waste bin itself. And through that, right, we then work sometimes with to find alternatives for the items to be reused somewhere else. Or we actually put in a financial system to track the wastage. So it becomes a commercial incentive to the company to minimize the waste generated within the operations itself, right? But we always start at the end part behind it, it's visible, right? And then once that kind of benchmark, right, as you start to put the process in place, right, you can see another business benchmark, but number of bins you require goes down, or number of collection the current bins goes down. The amount of material you recover back for recycling goes up, and that also provides revenue to the company. And in terms of your P&L, right, your operating costs also start to go down also, see?
Thank you for sharing that. So we wanted to ask you, out of all the experiences and events that you have organized as your company, what's your favorite example of circularity in action?
I think there are two. I will let my co-founder, let me introduce quickly. So Juhi is the co-founder of Yes Full Circle. Uh, Something I didn't mention earlier on also that we are very much in the UN SDG programs. Half our shareholders, our management team are women. Operations team are all women, and I have two of my colleagues here, Geenika and Juhi. I'll let Juhi and Geenika give some examples of what they've done to show circularity in action.
Thank you for having us on board, Tanya and Simran. So, as Herb explained, we are a circular economy platform. Yes, Full Circle supports organizations to become very sustainable, more sustainable. So, what we did recently was we initiated a plastic recycling program, which was called Waste for Good. And this program was a live case study of implementing a circular economy solution through educating the young generation. So we started this program in 3 schools in Dubai. There were 2 primary schools and a secondary school where we told them, let's recycle the household plastic. So the children were supposed to collect plastic from home. It could be the carton of milk, a plastic bottle, or the yogurt pots, and bring it to school where we had put designated bins. And you won't believe, in less than 3 weeks, we collected 1,000 kilos of plastic, 1 ton. Now that plastic was brought to a facility where we then reprocessed and it was converted into chairs. So we gave the chairs back to the school for the support staff. So the children could see the circularity, how from the plastic, which was actually going to the bin, but they took the effort of separating it, bringing it to school, and then we molded it into chairs. So they could see it was a live example of what can be done with plastic. So we created awareness and we educated the children. So this was a project which was very successful, and we're going to go to a phase 2. We have another example that Geenika could speak about, which was done in
Thank you again, Tanya and Simran, for having us. So, in UAE, majority of the population are expats, and usually, people travel back home to celebrate the holidays with their family. But given the situation last 2020, we cannot go, but to celebrate it here instead. So, the sale for fresh Christmas trees or the real Christmas trees soared. And usually after the holidays, it would end up to the bins and eventually go to the landfill. So we, Yes Full Circle Solutions, we propose to recycle the trees and convert them into compost and give them back to the customers who made their effort in bringing the trees to the designated stores. So this is actually a great example of converting holidays memories into something useful to your own garden. So that's it.
Okay. Thank you. That was pretty fascinating. Quite interesting to see the initiatives taken by such small children in schools. So now moving on. Now, if the logic of circularity and circular economy is already so compelling and enthralling, why aren't more companies doing it? What's stopping them from taking this action?
So there is a misconception, right, that uh, companies have not been doing this from before. They have been. I mean, we go to any shopping center or large manufacturing facility, you find, right, you always had things like carton boxes, OCC, metal, papers, right, always being taken up for recycling, right? I think what's happened is, right, it's become a tipping point, right? You know, where now there are more and more people, right, who are now engaging into this, and now the recycling is covering a wider spectrum of materials. So, I think so. If you watch the next 2 to 3 years, but you find, right, you know, that the take up rate and the acceleration rate of this, right, is going to be very interesting times for all of us.
Thank you for sharing. So, additionally, what roles will the community and government play in the conversations about the circular economy?
Okay. So the communities, right? Everything that's produced, right? It has to be sold somewhere. Okay. And ultimately, consumers, communities comprised of consumers, right, their purchasing decisions, right, would help to encourage companies, right, to ensure that their products manufactured are made in a sustainable manner. So from the consumer driving, from the purchasing decisions, consumers will drive the behavior of companies, right? Now, governments come in, right, by also putting in rules or regulations to again encourage recycling or to provide the infrastructure for recycling, right? And Singapore has been. I mean, if I'm not, if I see within Southeast Asia, right, Singapore has been quite good in terms of putting in the regulations to support this. So recently, in the last 2 3 years, we've had packaging laws coming in, okay, which are A, designed to reduce the amount of packaging that's in manufacturing, and B, to also get a collection network into place, right now. And things we have now, for example, your e-waste regulations or take back rules, for example, right now, so that if a consumer buys a product, for example, they know, right, that after end of use, right, they can give it to a designated a collection point, and then the infrastructure to take the material and to actually recycle in the place. So both parties, both communities and governments have important parts to play um, um, to encourage the circular economy. And I'm glad to see that happening in Singapore.
Okay. Thank you for that. Now, what do you think the current climate change mitigation policies focus on?
So, okay, so climate change, it actually comprises of two things. Okay, there is the issue having to do with energy consumption, okay? And that's a very important role to play. So you find that moving into renewable energy, solar panels, is also is important. Using clean cars, more fuel efficient cars, vehicles, electric cars, are all important as there, right? And over the so second part, of course, would be to look at making sure there's waste minimization, and we avoid we try and reduce our consumption requirements, like reduce the wastage that tends to happen. Um, and then also, right, we need to look at greenhouse gas mitigation, right, which is a function of two things, right? A, partly from using fossil fuels, and partly, right, from using manufacturing and production mechanisms that are not efficient, and also to reduce the waste that goes to the landfills. The landfills, then they decompose, and methane comes up, into the atmosphere, and that again alleviate. That also makes climate change more difficult to control. So there are three steps that are there happening today. I'm glad to see Singapore again. In fact, I believe in the papers recently, I think today or yesterday, right, where the government has taken the steps by saying that they are going to implement their climate change policies, right, 5 years ahead of the private sector. Okay, so that's a great first step and a great leadership example to provide.
Will technological innovations deal with the problems identified around natural resource depletion?
So technology, right? Technology can help us to identify where we can reduce the impact, okay, on natural resources, right? And through that we can take steps into play, right? Now let's look at an example, even at Savour, your app, for example. You have a tech platform that's able to bring up into the open, okay, the amount of food wastage that is happening to place, okay? Because you made it visible in the place, people can take steps into place, right, to reduce the amount of food wastage, okay? And by default, you will have impact, in terms of reducing the impact on the environment and reducing wastage of natural resources, right? So I think tech platforms are a great way of helping for that. Then you do have things like chemical recycling that right now, in your peripheries of recycling, right? Which again, Singapore has again, big part, I would say, now doing a pilot for chemical recycling. that allows then, right? Today, one of the biggest problems you have is that certain plastics can be recycled, certain other plastics can be recycled. Okay? And chemical recycling, right, does help to ensure that all kinds of plastics are recycled. Okay? So that kind of technology innovation that would mean that we are able to then recover more and more material for recycling, which means we reduce the impact that we require on natural resources to the virgin material. Right? Now, ultimately, technology is good, but also in the end, right, people have a part to play, right? So if we don't control the demand, okay, of all the items or that we eat or we consume, okay, there's also a certain limit to which recycling can help us, right? So if, for example, right, if today if equilibrium, okay, saying that okay, I use 200,000 tons, for example, of plastics a year, right? I'm able to recycle 200,000 plastics a year, right? I have equilibrium coming into play, right? But what happens if, for example, your demand is going to go up from 200 to 250,000, okay? Then that 50,000 gap has to be filled up from somewhere, right? So this is where the consumers have the important part to play, right? To check whether they really want something, do they really need it, okay? So if you have it, if you had the demand part being controlled into plain systematic manner, then and you have technology in place, right? Then yes, I think we would be in a very good position to minimize the impact on natural resources globally.
Okay. So thank you, Harbinder, Juhi, and Geenika for sharing. It was a fantastic experience having you here with us, talking about circular economy in the context of sustainability. And we have learned a lot, and I'm pretty sure our audience will learn a lot as well.
Yeah, thank you. It was a very enthralling session where we indeed learned a lot of things. So especially would like to thank you for sharing more about what Yes Full Circle does. And it was very interesting to hear more about the initiatives you've done, including the ones that you involve youth in the community to care more about the plastic waste situation in the society itself. So this brings us to the end of our second episode of our podcast series. And stay tuned for our other podcast guests who will be appearing in our subsequent podcast episodes.
If you like what you're listening to, do follow us on our podcast platforms to be updated when our podcast episodes are released every Wednesday at 5 p.m. The Sustainability Conversation podcast is on Spotify Podcast, iTunes, YouTube, IGTV, and Facebook videos. Do also share this podcast with your network if you think they'll find it beneficial. Thank you.